The person I'm covering in this video very clearly is someone who doesn't really seem to fit in with the type of people I've covered so far in this channel. Whilst I doubt many non-Americans know who this figure is, I'm sure there are at least a couple Americans who do know who this figure is instantly, with him being quite infamous, although this has obviously lessened throughout the course of history. What does make Charles Guiteau infamous is the fact he is one of the few people to have assassinated a US president, with him assassinating the 20th President of the United States, James A. Garfield. So, why am I covering Charles? Well, it's rather impressive how well he fits in with many of the people I've covered in the fact that he was a massive failure throughout his whole life, as you'll see very, very soon. Not too much is known about Guiteau's early life, but what we do know is that Charles's life didn't start off too well, with his mother passing away after suffering from postpartum issues when he was young, leaving him with his father and his 5 siblings, with some sources stating that his father beat him for what he perceived as failures. However, he got a break in his early adulthood, receiving $1,000 after the death of his grandfather, and so left to Michigan to further his education, going to the University of Michigan, where he would proceed to fail the entrance exams and not even get in. After failing, Charles decided to lower his standards a bit, deciding to go to a cram school to specialise in both algebra and French. He soon gave this up and moved to New York with a new direction in life in mind. Guiteau's father had ties to a community in New York known as the Oneida community, a very, very strange religious community practicing free love through practices such as group marriage, as well as a peculiar thing where men would try not to finish when having intercourse for some reason. In 1860, Charles decided to join the community. However, this did not work out as planned, where even despite it being a very open society, everybody hated Charles and he wasn't very successful romantically, which is a pretty impressive feat to not succeed in any way in a community such as this one. Charles left in 1865 to create his own newspaper, the Daily Theocrat, where he would spread millennial communism, trying to spread the teaching of Noyes, the founder of the Oneida community. This newspaper failed, and just over a year later he was back in the community, although only for a year this time, leaving with money he promised to the community. However, either out of anger towards the community or just being plain desperate, he sued Noyes, even going so far to blackmail him, although this quickly backfired when Noyes' lawyers threatened to prosecute him for extortion, which finally made him back away. Not only did this completely blow up in his face and almost get him prosecuted, it also pushed him farther away from his father, who retained support for Noyes instead of giving any support to his stupid son. Whilst not relevant to this video, but just a bit humorous, at least to me, the Oneida community does still exist in some capacity to this day, with it now being a silverware company. The group marriages and sex practices have not continued, however. Things actually seem to go quite well for Charles after leaving the Oneida community for the second time. Well, other than the failed lawsuit anyway. He moved to Chicago, where he got a job as a clerk where he worked and learned the law, even managing to pass the Illinois bar, where he was then able to progress into getting his own private law office, and then in 1869 even managing to get married to a woman by the name of Annie Bunn. Charles even began taking an interest into politics, siding with the Democrats, supporting and even making a speech for Horace Greeley, which he presented only once. However, this didn't make a lick of difference, and Greeley suffered a huge defeat against Ulysses S. Grant. However, even when things were going well for Charles, they weren't actually that great. Whilst he had his own law office, he didn't actually spend much time as a lawyer, arguing one case in court, with the rest of his business being debt collecting, a job he didn't do legally, with him taking more money than he was supposed to and not giving to clients, the people he's working on the behalf of. Even his marriage was awful, being abusive to his wife, with just one case being where he would lock her in a closet for days at a time, as well as dabbling in infidelity with prostitutes. something that will come up later on. She would divorce him as a result of all of this in 1874. After a couple of years of being slightly crazier than normal, such as almost attacking his sister with an axe, Charles went back to religion, believing himself to be religiously important, and would wander around trying to be a religious preacher, although would not do anything significant with these ramblings. His delusions of grandeur were furthered when he was involved in a boat crash. The boat he was on was completely fine, and the other boat sunk. Yet to him, this event reaffirmed his manic beliefs that he was destined for greatness. Soon after these events, in 1880, Charles jumped right back into politics, a faction of the Republicans who wanted Ulysses S. Grant to stay on for a third term. With this support, he began writing speeches to support Grant's presidential nomination, although Grant never actually won the Republican nomination, with James A. Garfield winning it instead. Instead of rewriting his speeches, which only made sense with the context of Grant's Republican leanings, the great Guiteau decided to literally cross out Grant's name and instead just inserted Garfield's name in Grant's place. Garfield went on to win the election, and Guiteau felt as though he was crucial to this win, despite his speeches only being presented twice in public. As Guiteau felt as though he was extremely important to Garfield's win, he believed he was entitled to rewards, specifically a consulship in Vienna, although he quickly changed his demand to Paris instead. His constant requests to have a consulship didn't work, as obviously Garfield and those around him didn't care about a crazy person getting a government job, and so he didn't manage to get the job that he wanted. His resentment made him believe that he needed to get rid of Garfield and that he would do this through the will of God, by assassinating him. Guiteau's plan was that upon serving God, such was his higher purpose in life, assassinating Garfield would elevate his vice president, Chester A. Arthur, to the presidency. Upon killing Garfield, Guiteau would be pardoned and applauded for his actions, finally being granted the consulship he had been pushing for months now. Guiteau purchased a revolver, and on the 2nd of July 1881, he approached Garfield in a railroad station and shot him twice from behind, one hitting his arm and the second hitting his back. However, despite these shots, Garfield survived the initial attack. In fact, he survived for quite a while after. The circumstances of Garfield's death are actually quite peculiar, being taken care of by a doctor by the name of Dr. Willard Bliss, with Doctor actually being his actual first name, so at least he fulfilled the ambition of his name. However, Dr. Bliss wasn't the most up-to-date medically, not using methods developed by an English doctor, Joseph Lister, of antiseptic spray and just being plain sanitary, leading to numerous doctors sticking their dirty fingers and instruments into Garfield, eventually leading to infection and then death on the 19th of September. Yes, the gunshot inflicted by Guiteau was completely treatable by today's standards, and even back then, the gunshot had a good chance to be treated, with him surviving 2 months after the original assassination attempt. Despite fulfilling God's request, things didn't go too well for Guiteau after, assassinating the president. He was promptly arrested, and as he didn't actually kill the president instantly, he wasn't able to be pardoned by Arthur, although he obviously wouldn't have pardoned him anyway. His plan was a complete failure. He didn't do what he sought out to do right away, with Garfield retaining his post for 2 months until his death. He wasn't pardoned for the crime and didn't get his consulship that he had been begging for months. Guiteau instead was sent to jail, where he promised a random police officer to make him chief of police and demanded a payment of $25 when a picture was taken of him. Public opinion was unsurprisingly against Charles after killing the president. However, this did not deter him, believing he would be released on bail and would begin doing lectures to pay for the finest lawyers. This didn't happen, but he did instead write an autobiography, which did very little. Sadly, I could not find this, but I bet it would have been interesting. Guiteau was left pretty much to fend for himself, having no money with everybody hating him, and would so decide to defend himself in court. Upon the actual death of Garfield, Guiteau was charged with murder, which he pled not guilty to. He would insist on defending himself in court, although the courts would not have this, and would instead appoint one for him, who would then proceed to quit less than a week later, leaving only his brother-in-law to defend him in court. Guiteau's defences in court were flimsy to say the least, stating, "I did not kill the president, the doctors did that, I merely shot him," as well as stating that he could be declared temporarily insane as God had taken over his free will, but overall he was still sane. The courts did not accept Guiteau's defences and found him guilty and sentenced him to death in 1882. When the verdict was told in court, he was not very happy, deciding to shout profanities at the court. However, this does not mean that the story gets any less weirder, because why wouldn't it in the story of Guiteau? When being sent to the gallows, he danced and sang a poem he made a few hours prior called "I Am Going to the Lordy," in a really weird manner, with some parts being in falsetto. He was also disappointed by the fact he wasn't able to get an orchestra to play during the poem. Then, a few moments later, on June 30th, 1882, Charles Guiteau was hanged. His body was autopsied, and what I'm going to say is going to sound weird, but it's really funny, and it's a completely real thing. Guiteau had a condition known as phimosis, which makes it so you can't pull back your foreskin. This wouldn't obviously matter, but the people at the time thought that this had an actual effect on his brain and caused him to be insane enough to assassinate the president. Although, obviously now, we know this not to be the case. Remember that thing I told you would come up again? Well, it is possible that as a result of his infidelity with those ladies of the night, he could have contracted syphilis, which then would have later developed into neurosyphilis. If he did actually contract neurosyphilis, it may be a reason as to why he acted so peculiarly, both in assassinating the president and in court. Guiteau's actions have actually been a big debate ever since he assassinated Garfield, with him not being defined as insane being perceived as a very peculiar judgment, as many then and many now see him as an insane person, and obviously it isn't hard to come to this conclusion. It seems like the ruling of the courts of him not being insane was due to the anger of him assassinating the president, something the vast majority of people were angry at him for, resulting in multiple assassination attempts on his own life. Thus, this anger was just to punish him and thus filled with bias. However, more recently, through both new legal precedents and advances in psychology, it is now regarded that Charles Guiteau was in fact insane, which isn't hard to see as I've detailed throughout this video. Although, all of this happened well over 100 years ago, so we obviously cannot say for certain how he actually was as a person. So this debate will remain to an extent, but the general consensus as of this video being uploaded is that he was in fact insane. The story of Charles Guiteau really is one that is very strange, full of twists and turns, and most notably his failures. I mean, the event he's actually even known for, a lot of it isn't even down to him, and is debatably over medical malpractice, and took over 2 months for Garfield to actually die despite shooting him twice. But sadly, this is where the story ends. Well, it actually ended well over 100 years ago, but you get what I mean. All that is now known about Charles Guiteau is that he assassinated the president, but that really doesn't come close to the absolute craziness that is abundant throughout his tale. Some of it was just down to him, some of it was because of the weirdness of the time. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. As usual, my Twitter and second channel are down in the description below, and I hope to see you again in the next video.